is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This episode number 365. I guess that's 1 year worth of Limited Resources. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line all the way from, I'm assuming, freezing cold Denver, Colorado. It's Luis Scott-Vargas. Luis, am I right or wrong? Is it cold there?
You'll find out tomorrow.
I know. That's why I'm asking. It's relevant to my interest here.
The low today was 23 degrees.
Oh, my God.
But no. To be fair, though, it feels like 18 because of the wind.
All right, so I'm screwed. I need to layer up. Is that what I don't have like a big winter coat. Like,
you can borrow mine. I have one.
But that won't get me from the airport to your house.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I am looking forward to that. Of course, Luis is referring to GP Denver, which is happening this weekend, and that should be a fun one to do coverage at. I'm excited. I'm going to be in the booth with Reed Duke, actually, which I'm really excited about. I got to do one GP, but I wasn't the commentator pair with him, and I was like, I really want to try being in the booth with Reed, and I got my wish. So that should be fun. Hopefully some of you can tune in for that. All right, we've got a cool show. We've got an exciting guest on the line here as well. I'm going to introduce him in just a moment. Before I do, I want to remind you about our sponsor, channelfireball.com. Make sure you check them out for all of your magic needs. That's right. Anything that you might need magic related, they're going to have it at Channel Fireball. That's sealed product. That's singles. You can find supplies, right? You can get play mats. You can even get limited resources sleeves and deck boxes at Channel Fireball. That's right. They have them there. LR. They're made by Ultra Pro. They're sitting on the store right now, and you can get them. And one of the really cool things about CFB is you can sell your cards back to them. And this is a really important part of the ecosystem because Magic's expensive, right? Let's just face it. It's not a cheap hobby. But one of the ways that you can offset that is by trading your cards back in. You do a draft with some friends. You end up with a little pile of rares. You can send those back to them, and they're going to give you a 30% bonus if you trade them in for store credit. And if you do that, you can spend that store credit on, hey, more booster packs or maybe a single you need for a deck that you're working on, whatever it is. And that's a really great way to help mitigate the cost of it. Of course, while you're there, you can check out the awesome free content. Some of the best players in the world making videos, articles, and podcasts like this just to help you get better at Magic. We know that that's why you're listening to this show. And I'm confident if you read those articles, you will, in fact, improve at Magic as well. Please check them out, channelfireball.com. The show is also brought to you by you via the Patreon. That's right. If you want to support the show directly, you can go to patreon.com/limitedresources and sign up. It's really easy to do. There's a little video there that explains it. I won't go into it too much, but it does open some really cool doors for you. You can submit questions for the question of the week. Now, as it turns out, we're not going to do a traditional question of the week this week because we've got a bunch of questions for our special guest who, again, I'll be introducing in just a moment here. But it does allow you to do that. And just by being a patron, that's right. You're eligible for free giveaways. I've been kind of on a tear with it. I'm enjoying this. I've just been doing them every week, and I'm going to keep doing them for a while still as well. This one is a limited resources deck box, a couple of packages of sleeves, and an LR sticker, and it is going to go out to our supporter, Max Brunner. I'm going to go German mode on Max because he's from Germany. Vielen Dank, Max, and I'll send this to you probably next week, and it'll probably take a while to get there because it's all the way in Germany. But thank you so much for your support. Again, if you want to be eligible to win the various prizes that we do on here, all you have to do is be a patron. It doesn't matter what level you're at. You automatically are put onto the list. Okay, it is time to bring in our special guest. Our special guest is a Pro Tour Hall of Famer. He's got 10 Pro Tour top 8s, which is kind of absurd. It's just ridiculous. That's 2 more than Luis. That's right. Including a victory. He's got 17 GP top 8s with 2 wins.
That's also 2 more than me, by the way.
And he is on my top 5 players of all time list for Magic players. Now, that's going to be different for everybody, but for me, he's right there on my top 5 of all time. Let's bring in Paulo Vitor Damo da Rosa. Paulo, welcome to Limited Resources.
Hey, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for staying up. Paulo, of course, is from Brazil, and it's a little later than it is there for us, but we do appreciate you taking the time.
No problem.
So we've got, I'm going to do the interview with you, Paulo, in kind of 2 different chunks. I'm going to do the first half. We're going to talk about Kaladesh Limited because you've got some strong opinions on it. You wrote an article for Channel Fireball kind of outlining your stance on it. And we've had a couple of brief interactions as well. And I really want to get your take on it. Luis and I like to bring in special guests to give our listeners different takes on different formats because there are different ways to approach them. And, Luis and I often agree with each other, but that doesn't mean it's the only way to do it. So we're going to start with that. And I thought the best way to kick off the discussion Would be a crack-a-pack. That's right. So we do this every week on the show, Paulo. We open up a pack. We pretend like we're, day 2 of a GP or maybe sitting down at a Pro Tour, and we crack a pack. And this one comes from Corey from GP Dallas. Thank you so much, Corey, for the pack. Let's see what we got here. Paulo, what are your thoughts on new pack smell?
Oh, I don't really have any.
What? You've been playing Magic this whole time and you don't go in for a whiff every once in a while?
No, not really. I just want to see what's in the pack.
Oh man, he's all business, isn't he, Luis?
Oh yeah.
Look, I just look at the rare.
We'll get to this later, but let's just say the fun part of the equation is maybe not the biggest part for Paulo.
Should we do it? Should we do this in backwards order for Paulo?
Yeah,
he says he just wants
first.
to look at the rare, right? All right.
Yeah.
Okay, so the rare is Deadlock Trap.
Okay.
What do you think about that one, Paulo?
I think it's a good card. It's much better than I thought it was going to be at first. At first, I looked at it and I thought, it's kind of like a weaker Tumble Magnet. Well, and Tumble Magnet was okay, but not great. But I think it's actually much better than that because a lot of the energy decks have a lot of energy and not that many payoffs. So you can actually just use it as a tapper for a very long time. So it's a card I'm happy to have in all my energy-based decks.
Yeah,
and you say a very long time because the game's going to go long.
Luis planting the seed early here, Paulo.
It's just good in these the classic energy slow mirrors, which is really what this format comes down to.
Go ahead, Paulo.
If you look at it from a percentage standpoint, like if you have 4 energy, that's half the game already. So the card's over half the game.
I think we're starting to get an idea from where Luis and Paulo stand on the format. Let's move on to the uncommons. We're doing this Paulo Vitor Damo da Rosa style here. Oh my God, Paulo, how lucky are you? You opened a Cloud Blazer.
Oh, yay!
Do you care at all?
I mean,
does this card hit your radar?
The person next to me. I don't want to first pick it because I think it. Well, I don't like first picking gold cards to begin with, and it's a gold card. Okay. And it's also a blue and slow gold card, so I really don't want.
Yeah, you're just naming advantages.
So I really don't want it. Like I would pick it. Like in my GP, the team GP, I had 2 Cloud Blazers in my deck, so like I recognize that the card's good, but it's not where I want to be, and I'll almost never first pick it.
Good God, man. What about, wow, this is funny. This is similar. This one, I think you do actually like a little more, though. This is Fabrication Module. I saw that you put this in your article as a card you thought was still quite good, even though, it's a little slower than maybe some of the beatdown cards that you like in the format.
To be clear, this is the one that when you gain an energy, put a ++1 counter on a creature, and then you can pay 4 mana and tap it to gain an energy.
Right. What do you think about that one, Paulo?
I think it's really powerful. Again, it's better in an energy deck. I don't think it's that good if you're just using it for value, like 4 mana tap, +1/+1 something. You can do that, but it's not great.
A little slow,
but if you actually, yeah. But if you actually have ways of generating energy outside of the module, in ways of spending energy, because it kind of gives you energy too, then it's really good because you don't have to spend any mana for it to work. So you just play it, and the next turn you play a creature that gives you energy. And that's +1/+1 already. So, and it threatens combat. Like combat math gets a little bit weird if it's in play. So I think it's really good.
Now, I also read that you do like taking artifacts early in this format. We've already picked up 2 of them: the Deadlock Trap and the Fabrication Module. Are these standing out to you as cards that you'd be happy to first pick?
Yes, I think I would. They're not traditional artifacts in the sense that they don't go in every deck that I want. For example, a card like Renegade Freighter, if you were aggressive, it's going to be in your deck and it's going to be great. And since I want to be aggressive, it will go in literally all of my decks. A card like the Module or the Trap, they might not necessarily make my deck because I could be, for example, red-white aggressive and have no energy whatsoever. So they're not artifacts in the traditional sense that you're staying super open by taking them, but they're still more flexible than our colored card.
Our next uncommon is another artifact, though I think this one's going to rate significantly lower on your list. It's Perpetual Timepiece. So we can get rid of that one, right?
Paul, have you ever played that card?
I don't even know what it does.
I've played it the last 3 times I've had it.
Yeah. It went really well with his Aetherworks. What was it? Not Aetherworks. What's it called?
Aetherflux Reservoir.
Aetherflux Reservoir.
And Metallurgic Summons. I had to make sure not to deck myself with my 3 Tezzeret's Ambitions.
Yeah.
That is a real concern.
Yeah, it was. All right, that brings us to our commons. Built to Last.
I like it. I think it's a card that you're playing in a lot of your white decks. But I don't like picking it early because I think there are a lot of decent combat tricks in this set and they're pretty interchangeable. So, like, if I have a white-red deck, I really don't care if I have Built to Smash or Built to Last. You could probably shuffle them both and give me one at random and it'd be the same. So I think you have opportunities to take it pretty late. So I like it, but I don't want to take it early.
And, you know, I'm actually going to stop us right here. Since we decided to do this PV style go backwards, where are you at right now? Like, you said you liked the Deadlock Trap more than you thought you would when you first read it. You also said you thought Fabrication Module was pretty good if you're in the right deck. Same thing goes for the Trap. You know, Luis and I about fell out of our chair when we saw a Cloud Blazer in the pack because how lucky could we be? Where are you at now as far as what you would be taking? What's pulled to the front of your pack?
Right now, I would take Module. I think it's a little bit more powerful than the Trap. It goes in a little bit more decks too. It just, when it works, the ceiling on the card is higher than the one on the Trap. The Trap is at most always going to tap 1 creature per turn, and the Module sometimes it just wins you the game. So I like Module followed by Trap followed by Call Brazier.
Now, off the top of your head, are there commons you would take over the Module?
I think I like Renegade Freighter more.
Okay, let's see if we get one for you. Revolutionary Rebuff is next. I'm assuming that's not a very Paulo Vitor Damo
Constructed All-Star.
Yeah. I think that's a card that all three of us can agree we don't really like.
Oh,
yeah, I don't like it.
Yeah. Speaking of combat tricks, we've got probably the most mediocre of them all here, Ornamental Courage. That's the green one that untaps your creature and gives it +1/+3 until end of turn. We're not first picking that. Sage of Shayla's Claim. Now, one of the other things that I learned about you, Paulo, when it comes to Kaladesh is that you love your 2-drops, which makes a lot of sense because you're trying to attack. Spoiler alert. And also that you love green. Are you willing to dip down and play a Sage of Shayla's Claim? Now, I know you're not first picking it, but are you willing to play it?
Oh, yeah. I've played it many times. Ideally, like, I don't like the 2/1 body that much because there are a lot of cards to punish 1 toughness creatures like Servo Makers, Chandra Spyrohelix, and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But I've played a 2-mana 2/1, even though it's not great. But if I actually have a lot of energy synergies, I'd be happy to play it.
Luis, where are you
like
at?
If I first pick. Sorry.
I really dislike the card. Like Paulo said earlier, in your energy decks, you often end up with more energy than energy sinks. So it's so rare that, I have played the card, but it's so rare that I end up with a deck where I need more ways to generate energy and don't, instead of ways to spend it.
Right. Yeah, spending it's the hard part. Malfunction. Now, I know that, Paulo, you're not really big on blue, so I'm assuming Malfunction's pretty low on your list.
Yeah, I'm never going to first pick it. I do like it more than most people in blue, I have found out. It's not a fantastic card or anything, but I'm happy to play it in most of my blue decks because, all the other blue cards are so bad. Yeah,
Luis, you don't like Malfunction, do you?
Not particularly. I found that the enchantment-based removal is just weak to a lot of commonly played cards, especially like Acrobatic Maneuver, Aviary Mechanic, and or things like Appetite for the Unnatural, which people just always main deck or fragmentize. So like you put this on their best thing, and then just like 4 turns later, it just stops working, and that's just not a premium removal spell.
Yeah, and the decks that you're playing don't end the game in that time frame, right? So you're looking for a more permanent removal spell.
Yeah. I think that the biggest difference between Revoke Privileges and Malfunction is that white decks even can be reasonably expected to end the game. Blue decks tend not to very quickly, and that means that you're more vulnerable to stuff like that.
Right. Rush of Vitality is next. This has to be a card that you don't like it when people play it against you, Paulo.
Yeah, it's very annoying sometimes. But I'll play it myself sometimes. I think a lot of the format is racing too, so in that regard, it's good. Mm-hmm. But can we just go back to something Luis said?
Yeah, of course.
Commonly played cards like Acrobatic Maneuver. Who plays that card?
He did say that.
Aviary Mechanic, you can't argue with that one, right?
Well, that one's good, yes.
Okay, Acrobatic Maneuver, I don't think I've ever drafted Acrobatic Maneuver and not had like one copy in my main deck. Why would you not? It's like a 3-mana draw card that also re-triggers like a great effect.
3 mana, draw 3, gain 2.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, yeah, if you're talking about ideal, but I mean, even then, sometimes this 3-mana draw card get 2 energy or something, a lot more minor than that. I do admit though, I end up playing it a lot less, than most, or than some, like certainly less than Luis does, but it's always a card that I'm optimistic when I take it that, oh, this is going to be really good in my deck. And then I just can't quite fit it, because like, you only have so many slots for cards like that don't really do anything. And, my ideal number of slots for that is between like 0 and 2. And I usually can find other cards that don't do anything that I think have a higher upside than Acrobatic Maneuver. Because there's nothing worse than just having to fire it off and like into a potential removal spell, or even not even have a target for it and just, dying with it in your hand or whatever. So I find myself not playing it super often as well. But the Aviary mechanic sees a ton of play. We'll give you that one, Luis. Giant Spectacle. Now, how aggressive are you trying to be here, Paulo? Because the Giant Spectacle is a card that I have avoided like the plague.
Play cards like Giant Spectacle.
Yeah. Do you ever play this? Like, are you that aggressive? Like, where you're trying to be the 15 land deck and you're just like, Night Market, look out, put a Giant Spectacle on it. Like, are you dead yet? Type thing.
Well, I think the problem with this card is that the vehicles in the format already do what it's trying to do, but they do it better. And in your decks, like your black-red aggro decks, your red-white aggro decks, you want creatures, and then you want removal because removal is great. You want vehicles because they're powerful. And then you don't have a lot of room for cards that aren't any of those things. And then, so what are you cutting for a Giant Spectacle? Like, I would just rather have a vehicle if I'm not going to have a creature. And most of the time, I'd rather have a trick, an instant speed trick.
Yeah, you're not putting Built to Smash for this card.
Yeah, I think Built to Smash is better. Built to Last is better, for example.
But so Giant Spectacle's built to last that just stays.
Yeah, I guess. But
I've heard that argument before. Yeah.
I mean, it's not false, but it's very simplistic.
That's all I go for is not false, but very simplistic.
Yeah, that's good. That's a new tattoo forming for Luis there. All right. Now, speaking of vehicles, you were saying, that you really like the Pain Train, right? The Renegade Freighter, which is a card that jumped out very early in Kaladesh Limited as a pushed card, right? A card that you could tell that R&D was like, all right, we need a really sweet common vehicle to kind of show off what these things can do. And boy, did they do it. That card is super, super pushed on many levels. The card I have in my hand is a much, much worse vehicle, but it is one that I have seen get a little bit of play. It's Aradara Express. That's a 5-mana 8/6 menace vehicle with a crew cost of a whopping 4.
Yeah, that card is definitely much worse than the Freighter, but I have played it a number of times. I think, like, you want it in your decks that don't have that many vehicles. Like, you don't want it to be, your 5th vehicle or whatever. But if you do have a ton of creatures and you are short on vehicles, then it is something that you can play. Yeah, Shahar, actually, we played the Team GP together, and we had a white-red deck for Shahar. And then he was supposed to be playing a 3-drop, the 3/2 that gains mana when you pay 1. I don't remember what it's called. But...
It's called Fast Monitor because I have one in my hand right now. Spoiler. Yeah.
I don't have that one. I'm just really good at remembering card names.
Yeah, let's not go back to the last time we tested you, Luis. You will get a chance for redemption, though. Anyway, carry on, PV.
And then Shahar when we weren't looking, Shahar just took it out and added an Ardara Express. Had 5 vehicles already or something. And then it was just in his opening hand in our first match, like, Shahar, what is this card doing there? I was like, oh yeah, I added it, I like it. And we're like, well, what's going on? And then he sided out a lot of times. But yeah, it is a card that you can play.
All right, so since this show is going to be a little higher on the nonsense than others, I have to interject with a story from the World Magic Cup here. Kaladesh Team Seal, just like the format Paul's talking about, Inventor's Goggles. Owen and the U.S. team opened 3. Owen took all 3 while the other team was looking and put them in his sideboard so that no one else would be tempted to side them in. And at one point, one of his teammates asked if they opened any, and Owen said no.
The card's not that bad.
Oh, that's great.
Owen said it was a key to their success.
Oh, man, that's fantastic. Lie to your teammates.
They went 2-1.
Okay.
That's, I guess,
success. In any case, Ardar Express, not the premium vehicle you're looking for.
No, definitely not. It does beg a question, though. I heard you say, your fifth vehicle, or when you were talking about Shahar. What is the number of vehicles that you're actually looking to run? Let's say that you limit them to the ones that we've all decided are at least playable to good. Up to the really good ones. How many? Like, what's the upper limit on vehicles for you, Paulo?
Well, I'm really more in the market for quality than quantity with vehicles. So, like, if you give me 3 Skyskiffs and 2 Renegade Freighters, I'll play 5.
You'll play all of them?
I'll play all of them. Assuming my deck supports them, of course. Like, I have a lot of 2-drops, and I have creatures that work with crewing. Yeah, I would say that 5 is my upper limit for a deck that, really works with vehicles. And the ideal number is probably 3. If you have 3 of the good ones, I'm happy. But I'll play 4 or 5, depending on which ones they are and how good my deck is.
Okay. Our next card is Weldfast Monitor that we just talked about. Is that good enough to bump Fabrication Module off the number 1 slot for you here?
Oh, definitely not. I mean, I like the card, but it's a red card already, so that's already more limiting than being an artifact, and it's just not as powerful.
Yeah, it's not that exciting. All right, well, our last card's actually a pretty good one. It's Die Young.
Okay, I like Die Young more than most, I think. But I still don't think it's better than Fabrication Module.
Okay, so
it's really good.
You're going to first pick Fabrication Module for our pack?
Yes, and my second choice is still the Deadlock Trap. If the module wasn't there, I'd take the trap.
Well, I'm windmilling Cloud Blazer, obviously.
Yeah, I am too.
I mean, have you
really?
Yes.
It's 2 colors.
I actually, to be fair, if I were playing if this was literally at a Pro Tour or a Grand Prix, I would take the Fabrication Module.
I
think it's comparable to Cloud Blazer, but just colorless instead of being 2 colors. It's not fully colorless. It requires energy, which has some demands, but that's less of a demand than being in 2 colors. So I would take Fabrication Module over Cloud Blazer, pick 1, pack 1. Yeah.
All right, interesting. I'm curious to see.
But I would take Cloud Blazer over Deadlock Trap. I think that Cloud Blazer is better than Deadlock.
It's that close for you. You agree with that, Paulo?
No. I mean, I think it being a gold card, you're going to play it like, 20% of the time, counting the times you splash it, or...
way more than 20%. You get to splash it. It's like, I'm going to take the Cloud Blazer and take a 2 with either, but like, it's not that hard to play. It's the exact kind of card you do want to splash.
Yeah, you're going to be green. It's just a question of if you're green, white, or green, blue at this point.
Sure.
Go ahead, Paulo.
I'll give you like 30% of the time that you play it.
All right, we talked about 10%. But you and what percentage of the time would you say the Fabrication Module makes your deck?
Like at least 50, I think.
Because you only want like an energy deck specifically.
Yeah, well, every time that I'm green, it's going to make my deck. So that's almost 50% already, because you're like 40% to be a color. I like green more than I like other colors, so I'm more likely to be green. And I'll play it in some other decks, like blue-red, for example. Sometimes it's good.
Okay. Why don't we move into our main topic? I mean, we've obviously started to hit on some of the main things that we're going to be going in here, but I want you to give us your overall view on Kaladesh Limited. Speed of the format, what type of decks you want, what type of colors you want. You don't have to give us every detail. If people want to find it, they can. I'll put a link to the show notes for your Channel Fireball article. But if you could give us kind of the overview, I think that'd be a good place for us to start.
So I think the most important thing in Kaladesh for me is that attacking is just so much better than defending. Like you have, a lot of aggressive 2-drops, like all the thriving creatures they want you to attack. All the vehicles are super pushed for attacking. And blocking is not that great in this format because, for example, if you want to attack with vehicles, then you can't block already because you have to tap your blockers. Mm-hmm. And, the combat tricks are super cheap and some of them only work when you're attacking, like Build to Smash. So I think just in this format, I want to be attacking because all your cards become better if you're attacking, like except for the blue cards. So you have 4 colors that want to be attacking, and you have artifacts that also want to be attacking. And then you have, a color that just wants to defend, but that doesn't really go well with anything because no one else wants to defend. So I guess my priority is just I want to be aggressive, and I don't want to be blue because blue is not aggressive. And I think it's really important that you're doing something at all points in the game, starting from the very beginning. It doesn't really matter what you're doing, as long as you're doing something. So I would rather be the person that plays a bad 2-drop into a bad 3-drop, into a bad 4-drop, than the person that plays nothing into a good 4-drop. Because there aren't that many catch-up mechanics in this set either. So
now, when you say nothing, do you mean actual, like you just haven't built a curve capable of doing that? Or do you mean things that don't affect the board? Like if I went, Prophetic Prism into Fabrication Module and you went mediocre 2-drop creature into mediocre 3-drop creature, like you're pretty happy with that, right?
Yes, I am pretty happy. Yeah, nothing includes cards that don't affect the board. Yeah.
Okay.
And I also think this format doesn't have any mana sinks because the design space for mana sinks, like for activated abilities, is stolen by energy. So instead of having abilities that use mana, you have abilities that use energy. And instead of having big creatures, you have vehicles which require creatures but not mana. So a lot of my decks just top on 5. There aren't many 6 casting cost cards in the set at all. So I really want to be playing 16 lands. And I think aggressive decks let you play 16 lands so you flood out a lot less. In controllish decks, they have some more expensive cards. They have to play more, but sometimes they draw those expensive cards in a land, or sometimes they just draw their lands and have nothing to do with their mana because there are no mana sinks in the format.
Luis, do you agree with that?
Sense?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Luis, do you agree with that?
I agree I agree with some of it.
I mean, we wanted a first pick fabrication module, right? We're talking about mana sinks here, right? Like, I think there's a lot of mana sinks in the format.
There's not traditional mana sinks. Like Paulo's right. Cards instead of a card having an activated ability of 3 mana or 5 mana, it will just be 3 energy now. Ruler Virtuoso is not a mana sink; it's an energy sink. The part that I disagree with, though, is that you can't assemble a long game deck even in light of that, because commonly played cards like Acrobatic Maneuver. Like if you Acrobatic Maneuver a creature with a good enters the battlefield ability, if you put Accomplished Automaton in your deck, then you have ways to use mana in the late game. Tezzeret's Ambition is a card that will give you an advantage in the late game. Whirler Maker is a card I think is good in this format, and I guess I don't disagree that there's a lot of things that reward attacking, but I also think that there are ways to construct good defensive decks. Like, look, I'm not building a control deck that does nothing, Whirler Maker. Like that.
Whirler Maker counts as nothing, by the way.
Yes. Okay.
We've had this argument on the show.
Still,
yeah.
I'm not building a deck that goes nothing, 4-drop either. I'm playing Consulate Skygate. I'm playing creatures that can block early. And then it just happens that instead of trying to finish my opponent with combat tricks and high end, and aggressive cards rather, I have decent high end or synergistic combos. And I think the biggest reason to play these like kind of do nothing control decks or combo decks, whatever you want to call them, is because I do feel that the build arounds in this format are very pushed. I think Ruler Virtuoso is like a busted card. I think that Restoration Gearsmith is just a very, very strong card, and there's lots of ways to like bounce it or abuse it. And the modules also provide you a lot of action. So I think there are ways to build these decks that combine cards for a great effect if you can survive long enough to do that. And it can make a lot of their aggressive cards, they fall off in the late game. Yeah, your Thriving Grubs just don't do anything when I've got a bunch of blockers in play.
Paulo, it makes me curious to get your thoughts on this, because are you saying that you disagree with like the premise that Luis just put forward? Or are you just saying that you think it's just better to be aggressive than that? Yeah, sure, you can do those things, but it's just I'd much rather just be attacking because it's a better strategy that's going to win me more.
Yeah, I think it's better. I agree that you can build controllish decks, especially if you have some bombs like Sahelia's Artistry, for example, like a Gear Hulk. Those are the kind of cards that you want to build into. So it's definitely possible to have those decks, but I think it's just way less likely. And I think it just rewards you less. For example, a card like, again, Renegade Freighter, it's going to be a 9 in an aggressive deck and like a 4 in a slow deck. Like a card like Thriving Grubs is a card that I'm very happy to have in my aggressive deck. I'm not happy at all to have in my defensive deck. And, what kind of card do you have? What kind of card benefits so much from being control? Like there's no card that is, insane in control and bad in aggro. There are a lot of cards that are insane in aggro and bad in control. So you really have to have the right. Well, Fumigate is going to be, yes, it is a rare, and Okay, that's one card.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's right. I mean, there's other types of cards too, like cards that, like, I haven't played a lot of red blue aggro, for example, but Whirler Virtuoso is a card that I'm really happy to have in a control deck, and I find myself just not having it in an aggro deck because I don't have blue red decks that I'm looking like, okay, I'm going to try to beat down with this. It would be fine, if it was a green card or white card or something, it would be totally good in those decks. But I do find that there's these little slots that you can find, and the other ones are just like the modules, right? Like you said, the fabrication module does a decent job in an energy based aggressive deck because it has that immediate impact once you start casting the creatures. But the other thing is like decoction module, like that card completely dominates the late game and does virtually nothing in the early game, right? And like those are the type of cards that I'm trying to leverage later on in the game that the aggro decks have no interest in whatsoever.
Well, I don't necessarily agree that the rare module doesn't do anything in the early game. Like
no. I was talking about decoction module. It's the other uncommon.
Which one?
The one that returns creatures to your hand.
Oh, the really bad one.
Yes, the worst of the three. But no, I agree.
Okay.
I think it's really slow, but I'll tell you what, if, the cards that Luis and I have been talking about here, a lot of these gold cards, the Cloud Blazers, the Restoration Gearsmiths, even a Whirler Virtuoso in the late game with a decoction module is almost unbeatable, right? Or I should say, especially Whirler Virtuoso with a decoction module. Those type of things give you the mana sinks that you were saying you didn't see that many of, but I'm seeing those, I look at decoction module as a really good mana sink in the late game that does, like I said, virtually nothing, in the early game. So I'm not trying to say that it's an amazing card, but I do see slots, where I want to put these type of cards and to try to maximize on them. And, because I think that they can win the game, pretty single-handedly if you can get to a stable board in the late game. And those are the things that, we've been kind of harping on the show, at least looking for those type of mana sinks or engines is what we've been calling them. These 1 or 2 card combos that can really dominate the late part of the game once you've stabilized the board.
Okay, no, yeah, I definitely understand what you're saying, and I agree that those things exist. But I think, at least my experience has been that if you try to assemble this kind of thing, you're just going to get run over by the aggressive deck.
Yeah, because you play a decoction module and they play a 2-drop creature, and now you're taking 4 or 6 damage off it. That makes sense. I mean, these strategies that Luis and I talk about on the show do come with a steep cost, right? Anytime that you have a decoction module in your opening hand and your opponent's playing an aggressive deck, it's a liability, right? I mean, sure, it might clean up the game for you later, but that's way down the line, and you've got a lot of work to do to stabilize from there. I had another question related to this for you. Oh, so this makes me really curious, Paulo. What do you not want to see on the other side of the table as far as controlling decks go? You've kind of aligned yourself saying, okay, I really think that this format's all about being aggressive, and I'd like to have a deck that's aggressive if I can get it. That's the cleanest route to victory. So as somebody who I often find myself on the other side of that coin where I'm trying to enable these long game synergies. What are the things that really annoy you? Like if they play a card on turn 2, 3, 4, I mean, clearly a card like a Fumigate or something is going to be annoying, but is there any cards that, are kind of blowouts from your perspective?
I mean, I was really thinking Fumigate as you were talking. I think that is the one that that annoys me the most. Sometimes Incendiary Sabotage is something that is hard to see because not everyone plays it, and it's instant. It's just so hard to play around, and it just kills your whole board.
Mm-hmm. What about Consulate Skygate? Is that just the bane of your existence, or what?
I don't care about that because it's
I didn't think so.
trading for a 2-drop. Yeah. Like sometimes you can.
Well, then it trades for a 3-drop.
Well, not even all 3-drops. Like it doesn't trade with any of the vehicles, for example. And if I have like a Spireside Infiltrator, you're taking one. If I have the Monitor, you can't block it because it has manas. Like if I have the Gremlin, I play an artifact, you can't block it.
I could block it because I'll have 2 Skygates.
Well, yes, you can do that.
Well, Luis has a perfect deck here.
In all seriousness, it doesn't need it trades for a 2-drop and then some of the 3-drops. I agree, it doesn't trade for a lot of the 3-drops, but it doesn't need to trade forever. It just needs to buy you time to when you do play your larger creatures. But I would not put
It's going to do
Conflict Stega
something.
on the list of like really annoying cards.
Yeah, that was meant as a joke. But, I would just say I'm curious to see, what are the types of cards that really slow you down? Like, one of the cards that I've played quite a bit of is Prakata Pillar Bug. Is that a card that annoys the aggro deck?
A little bit, but I think the body is not big enough that it's super annoying. The cards that annoy me the most, honestly, are the 3/4s.
Oh, really? Like the club security and stuff?
The Consulate Shield Guard or whatever.
Yeah, those are very annoying. And sometimes you have some curves that just cannot beat that Fabricate guy, the 3-mana 2/2 that you make a 1/1. Like, sometimes you go, 2 mana 2/1, 3 mana 3/2, and then they play that, and they have a 2/2 and a 1/1 that raises both your creatures. That's really annoying.
Oh, yeah. I like blocking with that guy, too. That's quite good. Well, I've got, along these same lines here, Paul, I've got a question from one of our listeners. We took questions on the Patreon for you. We got quite a few. This one comes from Chris George. He says, "Hi, Paulo and fellas. I find myself constantly avoiding aggro because I can rarely seem to make it work set to set. Fundamentally, it feels like I'm missing something. I'll empty my hand too soon or maybe too late, use removal too soon or too late, and don't easily recognize the subsurface value in aggressive specific cards. Even if it's being passed to me, I'll find a reason to avoid it because I'm so much more confident in mid-range and control, which limits my potential in any given draft." And, his question is, do you have any tips for him? Because, Paulo, as a professional Magic player, it's assumed that you're able to adapt to what the format gives you, right? And in this case, you've noted, okay, well, this format is giving me aggressive cards. It wants me to be aggressive, so I'm going to adapt to that and draft those type of decks when the Pro Tour comes around. But Chris is having a hard time adjusting from set to set when the incentive is there for him to draft aggressive decks. He can't quite seem to make it work. Do you have any advice for Chris on how to kind of expand his view on that?
So, first of all, I kind of agree with the person that normally aggro decks aren't the best. Like, I don't like drafting aggro decks a lot of the time. I think Kaladesh is an exception. I don't know how to rewire your brain to do it. I also think there is value in just drafting what you're most comfortable with. So, like, ideally, obviously, you would master everything. Like, you want to draft what is best. But if you get to a tournament and you have not mastered one type of draft, and you have mastered the other, then I think you should probably just draft what you're comfortable with because you will win more. So it's not a solution. It's a momentary fix to just draft what you're comfortable with, and I think that's fine. I think the best way to adjust to drafting aggro would probably just be to prioritize a curve more than you're currently prioritizing. Like, I think the value of the cards in aggro, especially in Kaladesh, they change a lot depending on what you already have in either spot of the curve. So I'll happily take a bad 2-drop over a good 4-drop because I don't have enough 2-drops, for example. And I think that's a mindset that, if you draft control, obviously you want to pay attention to your curve too, but you're looking more for power than for, a certain spot in a curve a lot of the time. And I think with aggro in Kaladesh, you're just looking to fill out a curve.
And to expand on that a little bit with control it's not even just that you're looking for power, it's that you have specific needs that you're trying to fill that tend to be a little bit different than aggro, which is like having a curve and having some pump spells, removal spells, but the various 2-mana creatures are all very interchangeable. Whereas, a lot of the control decks in this format, it's like, well, I really need 2 more artifacts to make my Gear Seekers work, or I need some energy cards to in order to fuel my Whirler Virtuoso, or I need a mana fixing card in order to play my 3rd color of spells. That's a lot more specific than I need a card that costs 2 mana.
Yeah, for sure. Another question from a listener, Paulo, for you. This is actually 2 different questions, so I'll give you them one and then the next. This comes from Cesar Bazua. He says, "Hello, Paulo. Thanks for coming on the show. In your recent article on Kaladesh Limited, you stated that blue is awful. I was wondering if you can elaborate on that. Additionally, despite you feeling that it is awful, what factors or specific cards would it take to pull you into blue? Is it at most a splash color, or can a good blue deck even be drafted?"
Okay, so I think the reason I dislike blue is that it's a control color, from where no other colors are control, no other strategies are control. So you're pretty limited in what you're doing, and I think you lose a lot of value from very powerful cards if you were control, which is kind of like what blue forces you into. I think it is possible to draft a blue deck, but for me personally, it would probably take opening a blue bomb, like Confiscation Coup or Seculated Artistry, or sometimes a blue Gearhulk. So if I have those cards, then I already have a super powerful late game that I'm trying to get to. I already have a reward, so I can draft the rest. I don't like being the person. I don't like drafting like the shell to get to the late game before knowing if I actually want to get to the late game, which is what I think you get with blue a lot of the time, unless you start with a bomb. So yeah, for me, for a blue deck to be good, I would have to start with a blue bomb.
Cesar also has a follow-up question. He says, also, it would be great if you could comment on the speed of the format. He says, as a somewhat new player, he started playing when Magic Origins came out and didn't start drafting until Battle for Zendikar. This format feels like the fastest he's played. It feels as if you're typically rewarded for drafting a deck on the aggro end of the spectrum, and he wants to know if this is a valid assessment. And I think we know by now that yes, Paulo will agree with that assessment. But can you put this in context for us as far as speed of the format goes? Is this one of the faster sets you've drafted?
Yes, I think it's probably about as fast as Zendikar, which is generally regarded as the fastest format. At least in my mind, that's how I feel it. And it has a lot of similarities with Zendikar, because Zendikar was the fastest not necessarily because everything was cheap, but because blocking was so hard. Because Landfall, for example, only work on your turn, which meant you would have a 3/3 attacker or a 1/1 blocker a lot of the time. So you really just want it to be attacking. And I think vehicles are very similar in that regard. They're just not good at blocking; they're good at attacking. So I'll find myself, passing a lot of powerful 6 and 7 drops for mediocre 2 drops, like I did in Zendikar. So yeah, I think it's probably one of the fastest formats we've ever had.
Did you hear that, Luis?
Oh yeah, I was here.
How's that Soylent sitting with you?
Yeah, great. Fastest for the thing is, like, a lot of the aggro cards you're talking about are not even that fast. Like Renegade Freighter gets games over with, but it's not like this format has a wealth of really powerful 2-drops and doesn't really have any 1-drops. Like Spiricide Infiltrator is just not that fast a card, even if it is an aggressive card.
I mean, you say it doesn't have any 1-drops, but like at my second draft at the PT, my deck had 15 cards that cost 2 or less. I had 6 1-drops.
Whoa! Oh my god!
What were they besides Night Market Lookout?
No, there were 3. Well, some of them weren't 1-drops, but like there were 3 Inventor's Apprentice and 3 Goggles.
Okay, sure. 3 uncommons and 3 equipment.
Yes, and then I had like 9 2-drops, like 3 Sky Skiffs and a bunch of grubs and 2 mana 2/2 and
this doesn't sound like an average deck.
Well, it was pretty good, but
but it is interesting what Luis is saying, right? Because normally when I see an aggressive format, I do look immediately to the 2-drops. There's usually some exception 1-drops, but it's the 2s that make up, especially the commons, that really make up the core of that. And if you want to use Zendikar as an example, they were rampant there. Every color had an aggressive 2-drop that, as you described, was better at attacking than it was at blocking and encouraged you to attack. In fact, some of them just couldn't even block at all. And so, that's where I look to the bread and butter. But, they fall off so quickly in Kaladesh, which is why I find this really fascinating, this discussion, because, just to zoom out a little bit here, the discussion that Paulo, Luis, and I are having is one that I've heard between Magic pros a couple of times now, and it's been similar, where people have very different viewpoints on what the format's about. And that's strange, because normally pros will gradually come to a consensus of some sorts, and the discussions usually start to get much more narrow around, I like this card, well, I don't think it's very good, or this color's the best color, no, this one is. And, it's sort of one of these like whatever conversations, but that's not how this format's been at all. It's been, people are still, and I think they will perpetually be on different ends of the spectrum. And I don't remember the last time I saw a format that threw this much of a monkey wrench into the works for how the pro community, approaches a limited format. I think it's really cool to see it. But anyway, the 2-drops, right? Like the one that keeps coming up is Thriving Grubs, which I found to be mediocre. It's fine. Like you said, Paulo, if you're playing an aggressive deck, sure, it'll go in there, but that's not on par with the type of stuff that we saw, in Zendikar that had evasion and often had 3 power when it attacked and that kind of thing, where this one, trades off for a lot of the other 2-drops, even the crappy ones, like the Sage of Shayla's Claim we were talking about earlier and that kind of stuff. Isn't it weird? Is it the vehicles, Paulo, that pushes it over the edge? Or am I underrating these 2-drops?
I think it's a combination. I think the vehicles push over the edge. I think they're a little bit better than you give them credit for, at least in my mind. But I also think you don't have to only look at the 2-drops. You have to look at the 4 and 5-drops and see how well they play catch up. Because like one of the things that I think, again, is that it's more important to do something than to do something good. So you really just want to be doing anything. So I don't care that 2-drops are bad. Like what I want is to have 3 creatures in play by turn 4.
Okay.
And because I know that my opponent's 4-drop is just not going to be good enough to stop those 3 creatures.
Oh, that brings us back to the 3/4s that you don't like.
Yeah, those stop them, but
nobody plays them. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of the time you just play creature. Your opponent plays a blocker, and then like a self-assembler on turn 5. Like that's just not, it's not a card that catches you up. They deal with that, you're dead. And like, what are the 5-drops in the format? Like, there's that. There is, Tidy Conclusions. Like the draw 3.
Yeah, there's Ambitious Etherborn, which I think is one of the more decent ones at actually getting you caught up because it gives you a good sized body plus a 1/1.
Yeah, but the format has a lot of tricks and cheap spells that let you push a creature through a much bigger creature, and there aren't even that many bigger creatures to begin with.
Yeah.
So I think I agree that the 2-drop quality is not super high, but I don't think it has to be. Like, even though Kaladesh is a format where bodies are super strong, like I think if you average the power and toughness for the creatures and the casting costs, you probably get, the most powerful format ever. Like, you're getting a lot more bang for your buck when it comes to power and toughness for mana.
Yeah, especially the green ones.
Yeah. Creatures just don't have very good defensive abilities. And like, it is so much better to just use a removal spell on a blocker and attack for 6 than it is to just use a removal spell on an attacker and take 4 damage. Like, the person with the advantage, like, they just seem to be ahead for a lot of time, and there's no catch up. Is how I feel.
Okay. I got one more question from our listeners before we move on to the second part of our interview. This comes from Jeff Good, who asks, how many lands are you typically playing in Kaladesh with few mana sinks and a fair amount of incidental scry and draw? I've been erring on the low side, starting at 16 rather than 17. That's been the default for the last several sets, is what Jeff says. Now, we've actually got your thoughts on that. You mentioned that you've been playing 16 lands quite a bit. I am curious, though, how flexible are you on that? Like, have you gone down to 15, 14? I've heard people playing even 14 card decks in their hyper aggressive, all 1-drops or whatever deck. How flexible are you on number of lands played in the format?
Not that flexible. I think I play 16 like the great majority of the decks. Sometimes I'll play 17, and I'll only play 15 if I have a tune. Like, I think 15 and 2 attunes is a good configuration. Sometimes 15 and 1. I'll never play 15 and 0, even if my curve is really low. Okay. And I'll never play 18.
Is that because you don't know how to use a hypergeometric calculator?
Partially, yes.
I am curious. This is getting a little nitty gritty, but I like doing that. How many forests in your 15 land to attune decks would be the minimum for you?
8, probably.
Okay. I was just curious about that. Okay, Luis, any last thoughts on Kaladesh? Obviously, Paulo, we're super grateful for you to come on and share your opinion, as you're not the only one who has this. Do you have anything before we move on, Luis?
I do. I think that there's a bit of an interesting effect that I will admit it actually kind of hurts our argument, Marshall. Part of that is that we aren't drafting this at a Pro Tour or a Grand Prix. We're drafting this on Magic Online. And a lot of the cards that we're talking about are much more fun to play. You cannot, in good conscience, argue that it's more fun to play Spireside Infiltrator than Cloud Blazer. It's just factually correct.
Right. I don't think Paulo would say that. Yeah.
And what that means is, while I do think it can be correct to draft these combo or control decks, like I really do think that these decks have a lot of reasons to be good, and I think that people are trying to win. It's not like I don't think people are trying to win, but the more people who are drafting these decks, the better these decks get, because they don't get punished by not having a fast start. Like in Paulo's, hypothetical where you go like nothing, dirtily guy self-assembler, like that's just fine against a deck that's just trying to play Cloud Blazer.
Yeah, go ahead,
yeah.
Luis.
And if you face these decks, you can get a sense that like, oh yeah, this works because you're facing off against other decks doing similar things. Now, again, I don't think that's like an indictment completely because look, people are trying to win online. They want to win packs, but there is some effect of the fewer people who are trying to beat down, the less other people have to respect beat down, which leads to more decks playing, 4-color nonsense.
You know what it reminds me of, Luis, is Cube. When a cube comes out on Magic Online and it's some configuration, sometimes there's a very good mono red deck, but you'll so often see people ignore it because they just don't want to play that game, right? They don't want to, like, if they're going to pay some amount of tickets to play in a cube draft, they don't want it to be over in 5 minutes. Heck, even if they're winning, sometimes they're just like, all I'm winning is another cube draft entry. So like, I'm not generating actual, tangible value out of this. So I may as well just play the decks that I'd like to play. And you'll see the sulfuric vortexes just wheeling around the table, where if you were playing at the Pro Tour and it was cube, that would never happen, right? Because, people would be like, no, this red, if I'm the only red drafter at the table, it's like a huge advantage for me to play this deck. And I do wonder how much of that is people sitting down on Magic Online in a format that's now a few months old, right? We're not, like you said, we're talking about people that have drafted it multiple times now, hundreds of times in some cases. And, they're just like, I just don't want to take a Renegade Freighter. Like, I know what that card does. I know it's good, but like, there's this cool Cloud Blazer or module or, in your case, Luis, some stupid rare or whatever that you want to try to bust. And I wonder how much of that actually affects the metagame as we see it now versus what we did at the PT and how it affects people's motivations. I mean, I don't think there's a really great way to know that, but it's interesting. I don't know. It does remind me of that.
And I'm not saying it's like a huge effect, but I'm saying if there is an effect, it's more it gives PV's side more credit than ours, as little as I want to admit that.
No, that's true. That is absolutely true. Okay, let's move on to the second part of our interview here. This is where I'm going to open it up to a much wider array of topics. We don't get to have Paulo on the show every day, and I don't want to let an opportunity go by to pick his brain. And so, first thing I wanted to ask you about, Paulo, was where you put yourself on the sort of feel intuition player versus a thinks things through style player. Where on that spectrum do you lie?
That's complicated.
Yeah, I'm not going to ask. I'm not going to ask easy questions, by the way.
Yeah, just think it through and go with your intuition. Wait, no, just one of the two. Don't do both.
I think probably more intuition than thinking a lot of the time, except for really tough decisions. Then I just put on the thinking cap. I think I've played so much Magic throughout my life. I've already seen basically everything. So whatever my intuition is, it's probably there for a reason. And it's probably thinking that I've already done. So like if I think, it's turn 2, like do I want to attack my 2-drop into their 2-drop or do I want to wait to block? Like I don't think about that every time. Like I don't go, a multiple choice thing where I try to see what happens with each thing. I just do what I think is right. And I think it's going to be right more than it's going to be wrong because I've been in those spots a lot of the time. And yeah, sometimes, I'll see and I'll think, okay, this is the percentage play, but I just have a feeling that my opponent has this card. And why do I have a feeling? Because my opponent played in a certain way that based on, how many hundreds of games I've played in the past that were similar to this, I think he has this card in his hand or they have their card in their hand.
I have a question about that. Do you do that even if you can't actually explain to yourself why you think that?
I think so. Yes.
Okay.
Good. Sorry. I don't do it all the time. Like I very rarely do it. But yeah, if I think okay, I think my opponent has this card because I don't know why. It might be the way they've been playing. It might be the way they blinked or whatever. I don't know. But I think they have it. Then I'll probably assume that they have it. But it's very rare. I think, so yeah. Okay, so I would say that for small decisions, like small turn-to-turn decisions, I'm more intuition-based. And then for more complicated decisions where I actually have to, think, then I try to think and ignore intuition. But then for the like really special stuff that happens once every 3 tournaments where I really have an intuition, I follow that. Is that a satisfactory answer?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great answer.
Totally.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up with what Luis said too about the explaining it thing. If let's say you're playing a match at the Pro Tour and you play your match as you normally would, and for you, that means that a lot of the time you're relying on your intuition and you're just kind of in the flow of playing a game. And the match comes to a conclusion and you walk to the sideline where some of your teammates are there and they were watching the game. If they ask you, why did you make this play? Are you able to usually reconstruct, like even if at the moment the thought in your head wasn't, well, if I attack with this 2/2 and they have this one trick and then they block, you didn't actually work it through, in words in your head. Are you able to do so after that?
Yes, most of the time. It's actually really interesting you'd ask that, because a lot of the time, like I'll make a play and I won't be able to, someone will talk to me about it and I'll be like, actually you're right, your play seems better. And then I'll go back home and I'll think about it. I'm like, oh wait, there's this thing that, actually makes my play better. That it was something I considered, but then just dismissed, and then considered again or something. And actually, I think my play is better. So
then you get on Facebook and message them, or
sometimes. Yeah, I think I can usually explain, if you give me some time, what led to the intuition being the way it is. And sometimes I can't, but most of the time I'd say I can. Yeah.
Does it bother you when you can't?
I mean, when I'm wrong, yeah.
Mm-hmm. But like, I mean, what if you still feel like you were right, but there's just not you know what I mean? Sometimes we find ourselves in positions in Magic where things are really complex, right? There's just so many different factors that have to go in, and you're crunching a lot of those sort of in the background while you think about something in the foreground of your brain. And, there's times when you're just like, I just know that this is what I should have done there. And I've seen Luis do this too. And it can be really hard to reverse engineer even your own thought process when you're, truly playing intuitively.
Yeah, I agree with you. But I think most of the time I can do it. Because, again, I think most of intuition is just based on past experiences. It's not like you're, a seer or anything.
Yeah, of course.
Like, I really don't think, like, a lot of people are like, why did you attack there? It's like, oh, I had a feeling my opponent had a pump spell or whatever. It's like, but why? And I think a lot of the time, if you press me about it after, I can tell you why.
Is that how you are, Luis?
Yeah, what I wanted to say, the reason I asked that question is one of the biggest leaps I can remember in terms of how I played was leaning, and I mentioned this on the show before, is leaning on my intuition even when I could not explain it. Because I did follow my intuition when I'm like, oh, I think they have a pump spell, I think they have a sweeper, and I'm like, why do I think that? And I could explain it, and then I'm like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. The scary part, and which I've gotten used to now, is, oh, I think they have a sweeper or a pump spell. Can I explain it? Well, not in this particular case, but I still think that, and I'm just going to go with that. And you have to sometimes, I think, trust your intuition, even though you cannot necessarily explain it. And that was something I found difficult, but now I'm very much in tune with. And
I suppose that depends on how good your intuition is.
Well, yes, and I have run into problems when I play less where my intuition is off and then I can't trust it. But
it becomes a little devil sitting on your shoulder.
Yeah, that is one of the reasons that I think that practice is helpful. And I agree with Paul. Both of us have played so much Magic at this point that we're not like, oh, this is a completely novel situation. I've never seen this before. That does not happen very often. But still, in-format practice really just means that you can... Basically, at the start of a format, you have to think about almost everything or a lot of the things. The more you play it, the more you can shelve into, I don't have to think about this anymore. And that I think is when I'm at my strongest.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think... Sorry.
No, go ahead, Paulo.
It happens a lot when you're watching someone else play. Like they're in the middle of a complicated game, and then they'll play a spell. And then I'll be like, hey, why did you play your spell? Like, this is how you're going to win the game in 10 turns. And they're like, no, it isn't. Why do you think that? And I'm like, isn't that obvious? Like, isn't that just what you think when you look at the cards and the board? And they're like, no, like, explain it. I'm like, I don't know. This just, seems to me like it's your best way of winning the game. Like, I can't really explain why exactly is the best way, but it just looks to me like this card is really valuable for you and you shouldn't waste it now. And then they're like, well, I think this card's not valuable at all. And then you just have those differences in opinions that you just can't really explain. But if I were playing that game, I would never have wasted that card, because for me, it's super clear that the card is very important, even though I can't really tell you why.
I find those really interesting because, this is where I think we actually get to be a bit results oriented, right? Like we try really hard on the show to not be like that, Paulo, right? It's one of the things we talk about a lot is, you try to make the best decision that you can with the information that you have, and you live with the result, whatever the result ends up being, right? But here, I find this part really fascinating because, for somebody like, say, at my skill level with Magic, if I was on the other side of that argument with you, my assumption would be that you're right. Right? It would be. I would just, not because like I put you on some pedestal, right? But like you're one of the most successful Magic players of all time. And there's a reason for that, right? And so for me, if that person's saying, no, I really think this is like obviously something that you should be considering more, and I just say, I just disagree with you, it's much more likely that I'm wrong. I'm not saying it's 100%, but it's much more likely that I'm wrong. And that, if I would take your approach to it, I could gain a lot from that. And, those are the moments I think where you can really learn a lot, from somebody who plays the game at a higher level than you do, than I do. And I find those things really interesting. And the reasoning for it is, look at his resume. Right. I think that it's perfectly fine to say, look at his win percentage at the Pro Tour on his career. Right. It's higher than mine. He's approaching the game differently than I am. I'm probably spewing here. I think that's a rare opportunity that, people that get to play test with you and your friends have the opportunity to take advantage of sometimes.
The challenge, of course, is explaining it. And
yes,
it's you can't always. And obviously, we can't have Paulo sitting on our shoulder. First of all, it sounds uncomfortable. Paul's like not that small, watching your game. And second of all, even if he couldn't explain it, that's like not useful to you. So explaining the process is useful. Like what Paulo is saying right now, and which is very similar to the things I've said. Part of it is we play tested a lot together and talked about this stuff. Is useful because each person has to kind of figure that out for themselves, what works for them, and we can only share what works for us and hope that translates in some form or fashion.
Right. This next question comes from one of our patrons, and it's a really funny one, Paulo. It comes from Jessie Combs. She says, Paulo, do you think being one of the younger players on the Pro Tour has been an advantage or a disadvantage to you? And do you find yourself approaching the game differently than some of your older peers? It's fun. I know how old you are, and you're not one of the younger players on the Pro Tour anymore.
You are? No, I'm not. Yeah. I'm 29 right now, so I think that would put me at way above average.
You don't look it though. Average, you look very young. I think that's you tricked Jesse with how you look.
And your love of like sweets and Disney movies.
Yeah,
I definitely feel young.
I am curious though to Jesse's point here though. You were very young, when you experienced a lot of success. In fact, I think you were one of the youngest players to hit like 300 lifetime pro points, maybe the youngest at the time. So, that was actually a significant part of your career where you were way ahead of the curve. I mean, when did you get voted into the Hall of Fame? 2012?
I think so.
I think it was 2012.
Yes.
That was 4 years ago. You were the ripe old age of 25. Yeah. You were 25 years old when you got voted into the Hall of Fame for, the thing that you've dedicated a lot of your time to. Did you feel, differently back then? Like, did you feel like you had some type of an advantage being young and being at such an elite level?
Not at 25, because I didn't really feel like I was younger in the competition at 25.
But what about coming up?
I played my first PT. I was almost 16, I think. So I think I was 15. And then I became like the equivalent of platinum for the first time in 2006. So I was 19. I feel like once I got to the big leagues, then it wasn't that much of an advantage because it was just basically the same. I didn't feel like I had, a lot more brain power because I was young, and I didn't feel like people underestimated me because I was young because they already knew me. But in my very first PTs, and even at the local level, I think being young did help me because I think people underestimate you. Like if you were just, a little kid, they don't think you're going to bluff them, for example, and they don't think you're trying to, deceive them when you do something. But I think it's very minor. I would not say it's a sizable advantage.
Okay. A little bit bigger picture question here. Could you be as good at any game as you are at Magic?
Like, is that assuming I started it when I started Magic, or if I were to start it now?
Start now.
Oh, I don't think so. I mean, not if you compare it to how good other people are. Because, I don't think I play Magic perfectly, and I think there are games that I could play perfectly. So, in a sense, I play tic-tac-toe better than I play Magic.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't make any mistakes. In Magic, I make a ton of mistakes. But if you were to compare it to how good other people are, like in tic-tac-toe, I'm average, or slightly above average, because some people are bad. But some rare individuals.
They haven't figured out the base strategy for tic-tac-toe, yes.
Yeah, and in Magic, I'm way, way up there because I've just been doing it for so long. I understand it so well. So I think if you go by percentage-wise, I don't think I'll ever be as good in anything as I am at Magic. And especially because the type of game that I like to play right now, that is not Magic, has a lot of, has some physical component, like League of Legends, for example. I'll never be able to be good in League of Legends because I just don't have the mechanics for it. Mm-hmm. In that regard, I'm actually too old.
You mean the physical attributes?
Yes, the physical part. So, I don't think so. I think I'll never be as good in anything as I am at Magic.
Eric, again, one of our patrons asked, he says, not really Kaladesh specific question, but I was wondering, what are the hardest cards to evaluate for you? Or what cards do you go back and forth on the most? In a couple of examples that he gave from recent sets were Lunarch Mantle and Blood Mist.
So I think Inconstructor Planeswalkers are the hardest by a lot. Because, you not only have to know how good they are themselves, but you have to understand exactly how the format works. Because sometimes the Planeswalker is good if there is a 3-power attacker, but it's bad if there's a 4-power attacker, for example. And that's just so hard. Like when I do set reviews for constructed Planeswalkers are the cards that I get wrong the most. For limited, I don't really know. I don't think there's a type of card that eludes me a lot.
Are you pretty flexible with your evaluations? Do you expect your initial take on a card to pretty much stick, or do you think it will change significantly over the course of a set testing for a Pro Tour?
I think it changes a lot from when I see the card to when I start playing with it, but I would expect it to not change a lot from my first to my fifth draft. Everything changes a lot, but then once I have the big picture in my head, I would expect it to not change that much.
Okay. Next question comes from Celso Tavora, who says, "Hi, Paulo. How do you maintain focus and readiness during long tournaments? How can we improve in that area?"
Stay hydrated. Bring snacks.
Yeah, we've all heard that, right? And that's become such a cliche at this point. To make sure that you take care of your body on some level. So let's just assume that you're doing that. You've got your thing of ice cream or whatever you bring, Paulo, to your Nutella bucket or whatever. But, after you get those basic necessities down of keeping yourself relatively healthy and well rested, does that just come naturally to you? Do you find yourself needing, telling yourself in your head, I gotta focus this match. I didn't last one and I made a mistake, or is it just your natural state?
I am so bad at that. I really wish I was better.
Maybe you should eat less sugar.
But isn't sugar supposed to be wake you up?
Only temporarily, Paulo.
Yeah, not over the course of a 12-hour tournament.
Yeah.
I almost don't
protein,
eat
man. Protein's where it's at.
Mm-hmm.
I almost never eat a lot during tournaments. I eat because I know I have to, but I'm never hungry. And I think my biggest problem with that is actually sleep. Because I don't deal well with jet lag, and I have trouble sleeping at home, and especially when I travel somewhere. So it's very common for me to just go to a big tournament with like 4 or 5 hours of bad quality sleep the day before.
Jeez.
And sometimes, it's the end of the day and I just feel like a zombie. I can't think about anything. And that is really a very, very bad for me, I think. And I think the way it works for me is if I'm very motivated, then I don't remember that I'm tired or something like that. Because like if I do well, I'll generally continue doing well because I'm so excited about it, and I'm so happy that I'll try super hard even if I'm tired. But then if I'm doing badly, I just let it get to me. Like I start, okay, this is pointless. I'm just gonna lose, and then I'm so tired, and then, which is I think part of the reason why I have very polarized results. Like I either do very well or very badly a lot of the time.
What are the effects of losing your focus?
I mean, you just play worse, and you stop considering things. Like you become lazy, I think. So, like, if I'm focused, I'll think, okay, I don't think my opponent has this card in their hand, but if they do, how do I beat it? And then I'll go, I'll go around that and find a way to beat it, or I can't, and then how do I beat that and something else? And I'll go through all this process in my mind. Versus if I have no focus and I'm tired, I'll be like, okay, how do I beat that? Well, they probably don't have it. I'll just attack. Like this is, I think, the biggest difference.
I see. You'll start to do a few more shortcuts that might cost you.
Yes, I'll be like, okay, which 2-drop do I play? It doesn't really matter. I'll play this one.
Yeah.
As opposed to thinking about it.
I just play intuitively because I'm lazy. I don't want to think.
Also, you do not share the same thing as Paulo does with regards to eating out of necessity, and I know because I'm the same as you, Luis. I can't. I mean, when he said that, I just cringed. I'm like, must be nice, Like, you have to remind yourself to eat because you should at some point during the day. Like I do not have that problem. Do you still need to practice for big tournaments like you used to, Paulo? Like, are you more of the? I use this term with Luis as a joke, but are you a theory crafter at this point where you just sort of think about everything and then just go play? Or do you still grind out a bunch of drafts and a bunch of matches with constructed decks and all that?
No, I think, like, if I had to choose one, I would choose theory crafter because I think a lot more than I play. But I think it's still really important to practice before the big tournaments. Like, I'm the kind of player that I almost don't play when I'm at home. Like, I only really do drafts on Moto to record them, for example, and I don't play any constructed. But I read a lot of articles, so I watch coverage. I know what's happening, even if I'm not playing. But I think that's enough for most of the time. But when you're going to a big tournament, it's not enough. So I have to play with the new cards. I have to form an opinion by myself. I have to go through a lot of interactions so that my intuition in the tournament can be right. So yeah, I think it's still really important to practice, which is why I like to do a 2-week intensive course before the PT to play with the new cards. I think if I didn't play test as much before tournaments, I would still be able to do relatively well, but it would be worse.
I see. Joel, one of our listeners, has a very important question for you. He says, Paulo, how are you year in and year out the most adorable Magic pro?
Oh, am I? I don't know.
That's what Joel says. You're on the list.
The accent, maybe.
Yeah. What's your secret, Paulo? all that Brazilian beach time, or?
Well, I don't have a lot of that.
Yeah. I actually have a question that is, I think, a little more important. Do you still like playing Magic?
I do, but not. It's a different way. Like I like the competition, and I really like doing well. But it's not as much fun for me as it used to just play Magic for no reason. Like when I was younger, I would be like, hey, I would talk to a friend, like, let's play some Magic, or let's play Mental Magic, or let's play this other card game, or let's play, Commander. And I would go to the store every day, I would play something. And because I thought it was fun, not because I had to. But nowadays, I've associated it so much with my job that I just can't get as much fun out of it. So, like when there isn't a tournament, I just don't play because this is the kind of thing that I do for a job, and right now I'm on a break. I'm on vacation, so to speak. So it's still fun to prepare. Like I like being around my friends and play testing and trying to find what cards are good I think that part's really exciting. I really like it. And then playing the tournament, you're playing for a lot. That's exciting too. But I don't have as much fun just playing for no reason. No.
Luis,
Which is why I don't.
Is that true of you, Luis? Because you tend to play more than Paulo does in your in-between time.
I do. It is not the same for me. I will agree to some extent with Paulo where like I live near, work with, and I'm friends with a lot of Magic players. Josh or Leighton, Matt Nass, what have you. The number of times I've been like, "Hey, Josh, let's just play a game of Magic." That's actually zero. Like we've never been like, "Let's just play a random game of Magic." But I intrinsically enjoy playing Magic. I think a lot more than Paulo does. I like streaming it. Where I'm not playing it for a particular reason, but I enjoy the act of playing it, and I enjoy the interaction of streaming and stuff like that. I don't play a lot of Magic Online when I'm not streaming, for example, though. I'll be like streaming or recording videos because it's like two things for me. I actually enjoy the game itself, but I also enjoy the creation aspect of, you're creating a video or you're doing a stream where you can talk to people while you're doing it. So I do like, and I like that people enjoy it. So I'm not going to say I spend a lot of time just like playing random games of Magic, but I also play a lot more Magic than Paulo because I get enjoyment in a different way out of it, I think. Like a lot of the times, I guess this year's a little different because I'm not playing in as many tournaments, but even in even last year when I was playing in all the Pro Tours, I still played a lot of like Cube because I liked playing Cube. Actually, Cube's an exception. I think I did like 50 vintage Cube drafts, just not on stream or recorded. I just did them. So
yeah.
In summary, I guess I do like playing Magic.
Yeah, I think so. Paulo, Kyle wants to know, what are some hallmarks of a limited format that you enjoy playing?
I think the most important thing for me is that there aren't just cards that win the game. Like, I think when there are a lot of bombs and there are no ways to answer them, that's really, really bad because it feels like, they have that in their seal deck, you can't win, or they drafted that, you can't win. And other than that, I like games that have it's really similar to Constructed. I think I like games where you have interesting decisions that matter. So basically, they don't have to be complicated necessarily, but games that reward you for playing in a way that not everyone would play. So like having meaningful decisions. And I guess those two things.
Kyle also wants to know, what are the top lessons you've taken from Bridge to make you a better Magic player? Now, Paulo also plays the card game Bridge as well, and he wants to know if you've gotten anything out of Bridge that helped you with Magic.
It was mostly the other way around, because when I started playing Bridge, I was already a pro Magic player, so I took a lot of Magic things into Bridge. But the thing that I think I learned the most on Bridge is to how to play with a partner. Which is not common in Magic, but now they have been pushing more, team events, and I think it's really important that you behave well with your partner. There was one particular episode that stuck to me. I was playing. I had a partner, and he was much better than I was. And then I did something that was wrong, and then we lost a ton of points. But then he talked to me during the game, and he said, "Oh, don't worry. There's other thing that could have happened that would actually be even worse for us. So what happened wasn't bad." And I was like, okay, so I was happy about that. And then when, the game ended and I went to compare the boards, so in Bridge, you played the same board, so you can see everything after that. I told him, actually, what you said was wrong. There was nothing worse that could have happened to us. This was the absolute worst. And he said, "Yeah, I know, but I didn't want you to feel bad and to play badly after that. So I just made it up." And it worked. And then you see in Magic, you go to a team tournament, and everyone is blaming each other. They're like, "Why didn't you attack with that? You're so stupid. You made us lose," or whatever.
Oh, yeah, I've seen that.
That doesn't really get you anywhere. Like, all it does is make the person play worse.
Oh my God. The worst thing is when you ask someone's record, they're like, "Well, I'm 4-0, but my team's 2-2.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Like, and they're standing right there.
It's like, oh, shut the hell up.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think this was the biggest lesson that I took from Bridge to Magic, is just be nicer to your teammates.
Yeah, that's a good lesson for life. One thing, I've watched you play a lot of Magic now over the years since I've been in the commentary booth, and the two things that stand out are, one, lands in front of creatures, which we've got you off of now, at least in the future materia. So thanks for cooperating with us on that. The other one, though, that stands out is, you are one of the most diligent I've seen about front loading your decisions. You will sit there just with, having done nothing for the turn outside of drawing a card and untapped your permanents and think, and then you will do your whole entire turn kind of in one motion. How important is that to you? Is that just a habit for you? Do you think that that's strategically, important?
I think it is for two reasons. First, because you can make a better decision when you know how it's going to affect the entire game. So the more information you have before you make a decision, the better that is. And if I make, decision A done, then I'll make decision B by having information for decision A, but not knowing what C, D, and E are going to be. So if I kind of decide from A through E all at once and try to put them together in the same decision, then I'll have more information for each particular one because each one will see other four decisions that are being made at the same time. So I'm making a more informed decision by deciding at the same time everything that's going to happen and how it's going to impact the turn and the game. And the second reason is that it doesn't tell my opponent what I'm thinking about. So for example, if I think for a very long time, so say I keep my hand, I play my fetch land, I sacrifice it, I get a mountain, and then I think for a very long time. My opponent knows I have 2 1-drops that I can play, because this is the only thing I can be thinking about. But if I think for a very long time on which 1-drop I'm playing before I even keep my hand, my opponent doesn't know if I'm thinking about keeping or mulliganing, they don't know if I'm thinking about which land to play, they don't know if I'm thinking about which land to fetch, and they don't know if I'm thinking about which 1-drop to play. So you actually give your opponent less information by thinking as early as you can.
Now, I have a follow-up question for this. It's one I've wanted to ask you for a while, which I find myself in a situation because I try to do what you do, and that's not my natural state. So I'm more of like a do things in sequential order. So it's taken me a little bit of time to get used to it. But one situation I find myself in all the time is, especially in limited, I've found is when and if to play my land, because generally I've seen you, when it's reasonable, wait to play your land. You don't want to show your opponent that you have an extra land that it could affect combat or some other decision. But then the times when I do play my land in my first main phase, I often do it because I'm basically telegraphing that I have a spell that costs, 5 that I want to be able to cast during combat, right? And it's tough if I don't play my land during my first main phase for the first, say, 4 turns, and then I play my 5th land, and I'm staring down at a tidy conclusion. I just think to myself, if my opponent was paying attention, they would notice that I've broken my pattern here and that there has to be a reason that I broke my pattern. And they might be able to deduce that I have, a card like Tidy Conclusions or maybe, 2 spells or something like that. Do you is that something I even should be worrying about? Because I also notice that most people just don't pay attention at all anyway.
I think most people don't pay attention a lot of the time. And I don't think it matters that much, but I think it's all about, it's all about which kind of information you're giving. So I think your goal is to give you the most possibilities while giving your opponent the less information. But possibilities are more important than information. So if you think there's a chance you want to play Tidy Conclusions pre-combat, you just have to play the land. Mm-hmm. Right? Even if it gives it away, you don't have a choice. I think in this spot you're forced to play. But it can also be a spot where you want to make them think you have Tidy Conclusions. Then you have to play your land, because if you don't, they're never going to be afraid of that.
And that's the key, right? You have to. We in poker we'd call that balancing our range, right? We would do something to make sure that we keep our opponents honest. Like, for example, play that 5th land, even if I didn't have Tidy Conclusions, which doesn't occur to you, right? Because, you're in this sort of workflow where you're saying, okay, I play my land on my second main phase to disguise if I'm hitting my land drop or not for the turn. Because if I play it during my first main phase, then it opens up a lot of options that my opponent could see from me. But, it's hard to remember to sometimes, even if you don't have a Tidy Conclusions, just randomly play a land in your first main phase and then go to attacks, right? That can be difficult.
Yeah, it can. I think you really need to be very familiar with the format and know what kind of things you could have, even if you don't have them, so that you represent them some percent of the time and some percentage you don't. Like, if you don't know there is a spell that costs 5 mana and can be used in combat, you're never going to do it. So you have to know that this spell exists, and then most of the time I think you just play your land pre-combat in those spots. Like if I'm gonna play a land, the thing is that if you are not gonna play the land, then you aren't giving anything away. But if you are gonna play the land post-combat, then if you don't do it, you're actually telling them that you don't have the conclusions. Because you played the land anyway. They know you have the land, and you didn't play it pre-combat. So you're never going to cast that conclusions, so you don't have it.
Right.
What if you knew you weren't going to cast it, and you wanted to make them think you didn't have it, but you did have it?
Well, then that's
awesome.
That is something that can happen, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes I'll find myself playing a land pre-combat just to open up the possibility that I could have any number of cards, because one of the biggest mistakes I've seen people make, like against me, is being too conservative, right? Where like I just want them to think of the most possible options because I feel like they get crippled by that. Sometimes people will say, I can't block. He has 3 different colors and 4 different cards in hand and 4 mana. Like any bad thing could happen. So I'm just going to take it. And, going back to what you mentioned about the team aspect, normally people don't say those things, right? Because it's just a one-on-one game and they're not going to tell you that. But you actually can hear people, when they have a teammate sitting over their shoulder and they go, hey, why didn't you attack? And they'll be like, dude, he's got 4 mana and like 4 cards. He could have anything. And it's like, and you look at your hand and you're like, well, I guess I could, but like you should have attacked,
This
it's
is
weird.
Kind of a side note, but I started winning more when I assumed my opponents just like rarely had anything.
Yeah, I did the same thing too.
I'm just like so off it. I'm just like, they don't have it. I'm just way too lucky. There's no way they would have anything.
Yeah, I'm sure that's how all professional Magic players approach this problem.
I'm making light of it, but I think that people hit this curve where at first you don't play around anything because you don't know what to play around or how to play around things, and you just play your game of Magic, and that's fine.
Right.
Then you get good enough to understand you should play around things, and you play around way too much stuff.
Yeah.
I think that people on average who are listening to this podcast, who have gone out of their way to listen to a podcast about Magic the Gathering, probably play around too much stuff, because that's almost exactly where I was as a player, that developmental phase where I would play around too much stuff. And I still see that at the level, like Grand Prix and whatnot, or like, when I'm playing at drafts on Magic Online, my opponents play around so much, and it's just like, you can play around a little less. Just, they cannot always have it.
Yeah, I was lucky. I got to have that time be relatively short during my development because I got to apply a lesson from poker, which is, it's hard to make a hand. Like, your brain is very good at figuring out the scary things.
Maybe.
Yes. And it's just very difficult. Also, one of the interesting things I think that pops up as well that a lot of players at that level don't fully think through is sometimes they say, you'll ask them, well, why didn't you attack? And they say, oh, they could have had this removal spell. But they don't actually think through, well, what if they did? Right? And sometimes it's like, okay, that obviously it's not good, but their removal spell is going to kill one of your creatures at some point. And as long as you don't open up a complete blowout scenario for it, sometimes your creature dies to a removal spell. And then the times when they don't have it, the attack's just good. And, sometimes incomplete thoughts, I think, will get people as well, where, you can actually just press them a little and say, okay, so let's say they have it, then what happens? And they just look at the board like, well, I didn't really consider it. I just know that it's bad to play into removal spells or combat tricks, so I don't do that. It's like, no, that's not quite, sometimes there's varying degrees within that you're willing to accept the risk on, and sometimes you're not, right? And differentiating between those can be quite difficult as well. That was a great aside, by the way. Love that aside. Paulo, I've got a couple more questions for you here. The first one is it's really not on topic, but I'm just curious because I did listen to an interview you did, and I wanted to give you just sort of a big picture thing is, what would you change about Magic coverage? I know that you like League of Legends and that you watch, other esports, more true esports. What would you change about Magic?
And we're just curious. We have no vested interest in this.
No, I have no.
Is that the question? Like, what would I as a person like the most, or what
No.
do I think is best for Magic?
No, let's say, yeah, the second one. Let's say we put you in a high ranking, director position at Wizards of the Coast where they said, look, we trust you, Paulo, to make the best decisions for, the company and for our brand or whatever. What would you do then?
I think there are two things that come to mind. The first one is more expert level analysis that I think is really important. I might be super biased because, I play the game at a high level and this is what I want to see. But yeah, for me, like you have to be able to understand what's happening to explain it. And I think a lot of the commentaries can do that, but some don't do it as much as they should.
Yeah, this is where we lean on the professional level players, the Hall of Famers and those type of players, right? That really understand the game at a deep fundamental level and can convey that to the audience.
Yes, I think it's important to always have one of those people.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing is that, there's actually two more things. The second thing is that I like watching games of Magic more than I like watching any type of side content. And I understand that you cannot always know how long the games are going to take, so you have to have side content prepared because you don't want to pause the stream. But I think a lot of the time, we as players wait for a very long time for coverage to start. And like we're all ready to play, and then when we've already mugged and we have our land in our hand to play, and we're like, oh, you guys have to hold because coverage is talking about something, and then we hold for 5 minutes. And that is 5 minutes of games that could be happening that aren't because someone's talking about something. And then if you go watch League of Legends, they'll stop mid-sentence and they'll say, players are ready, go. And they'll just completely forget everything they were talking about and go to the game. So I think that would be an improvement to just try to at as many games as you can, as quickly as you can. And the third thing is I think a little bit more focus on the players rather than on the cards, which I think is what League of Legends does. It's what Hearthstone does a lot of the time, and it's something that Wizards is, I think, getting better at. But right now they do a lot to promote the cards. Like there's a lot more about Gideon going on than there is about Brian Brown doing or Shahar or the people like the world champion or the PT winners or the platinum players. And I think it would be better if it was focused more on the players and an attempt to get people to relate more to the players and to be invested more in the players than the decks and the cards. But okay. I don't know if I'm right about that because I don't have. This is just my not an expert opinion. I've never worked with that. I've never studied that. So this is what it looks to me from my position as a spectator of a certain level, and I could just be completely wrong.
Of course,
but totally accept that.
I wanted to pick your brain on it. I find this topic interesting. I know it's something that you have thought about before. Luis, do you have anything? I have one more question for Paul. I don't know if you had anything you wanted to pick his brain about while we have him on the air. You probably already know everything about him, but
no, I have spent a lot of time with Paulo. I mean, to give I guess listeners a little bit of backstory. Paulo and I met before we were really like on the Pro Tour like train. Like Paulo, you got essentially platinum I think the year before I did, in 2006 with your finish at Worlds, and 2007 is the first year that I was like a pro level or whatever. So a lot of the reasons that you may sound like we have similar philosophies, except for maybe on Kaladesh Limited where Paulo's like very wrong, is that we spent a lot of our formative Magic years playing together and testing together. We were on the same team for 5 years or whatever, and we talked about Magic a lot at that point. And I think that if I had to choose like a list of 5 people who influenced how I play Magic, Paul is definitely on that list. So I think that it's been pretty awesome having you on the show. But in terms of questions I can ask that I'm interested in either myself or the listeners having an answer to, I don't have anything this instant.
Okay.
But I have some stories for later, so we'll get to that.
I'm sure we'll get to those. I have one more question for you, though, Paulo. I have to ask this. I'm sure you've been asked it before, but not by me. So Luis just mentioned Worlds in 2006. And
yeah, I was setting it up. Look at that.
It was beautiful. And this what ended up being a pretty famous game. I believe it was a game 5 between you and Makihito Mahara. And Randy and BDM did a great job of kind of working us through as the viewer. I'm going to put a link to the show notes for this for people that haven't seen it. But the Cliff's notes are that Mahara is playing a storm deck that uses rituals to generate a lot of mana and cast a really expensive spell that supposedly wins him the game. And Paulo's playing an aggressive creature and burn based deck. And Mahara makes a mistake. He miscounts his mana. And it takes him a while to come to that conclusion. Then it takes him a really long time to decide what he's going to do about it. And the whole while we get to, it was actually way too long to watching it back. But we get to watch not only his face go through the like, oh my God, what did I just do? And then trying to work through some type of contingency plan, but also yours on, okay, he's going off. I'm going to lose this game, up to, oh my God, he's screwed up. What was going through your head during that time stretch? Because it went on forever. And I can't imagine the ups and the downs. And just, again, to frame this was 10 years ago. Paulo was 19 years old at the time and in a high pressure situation at Worlds. What actually was going through your mind during that stretch?
It was a pretty wild roller coaster because it was game 5. And I mulliganed to 5 that game, and I missed my second land drop. So I thought I was for sure going to lose. So like I had no hopes, no expectations. I thought I was just dead. And then that happened, and I was like, wait, actually maybe I'm not dead. Maybe I'm just going to win. Mm-hmm. And then you start taking longer and longer, and I'm like, this is amazing. I might win this game. And I was so happy. And then he killed me. I was like, yeah. But
he had to get very lucky to do so.
He did, yeah. But I actually think it was pretty awesome that it happened, because what's if you're gonna get unlucky, what's the worst thing that can happen to you is that no one knows and no one believes you. And then
see, that's the cross I have to bear. No one believes I'm horribly unlucky.
Oh God.
Yeah, if you go to your friends, you're like, you don't believe how unlucky I got. My opponent got so lucky. They're like, yeah, sure, probably just drew a 10-outer. Or whatever.
Yeah.
And then, but this was just on camera. Everyone saw how lucky you got. Everyone saw how unlucky I was. So that was great. Wow. I feel vindicated.
Man, so much upside.
Yeah. If I'm going to lose, given that I'm losing anyway, I would rather lose like that in the big stage and have it be a good story and have everyone see it, than just, him having the third right of in his hand already at the start of the turn.
And just killing you.
Obviously, I would rather win. But, yeah, in this spot, I would rather it happen like that. So, and I was super happy for about top 8 in the tournament. It was my second PT top 8, but my first individual PT top 8. I got to the highest level. I think I even finished 3rd in the Player of the Year that year while playing 1 GP.
Yeah, BDM actually mentions that on the commentary too. It's hard to fly to GPs when you're from Brazil, though.
So I was so happy, and I thought I was going to lose anyway because I'm mulliganed to 5. So it was definitely more happiness than anger for me at that point, even if I was ultimately disappointed by being deceived.
Luis, did you feel a disturbance in the complaint equity force when Paulo lost that? Because he really garnered a lot of complaint equity out of that.
I can tell you exactly where I was when that happened.
Really?
Yeah, I was doing a team draft in the other room.
That's really funny.
But I heard about it.
That was in Paris, is that correct?
Yeah, that was Pro Tour Paris. This was my first Worlds, actually.
Okay, yeah. Good stuff. Paulo, first off, thank you so much for coming on the show and being so candid with us. We really appreciate you taking the time. I know it's late in Brazil, and it was a great show, and we're really happy to have had you on. I also want to give you a chance to let people know where they can find you, maybe on social media or any of the content that you make or anything else that you wanted to mention.
So you can find me on Twitter. It's pretty easy, just at PVDDR. I'm always there. I'm also always on Reddit and Facebook, so Paulo Vitor. And I write weekly for Chain of Haribo, so chainofharibo.com. You can just, if you have any questions, you can, I'll always read all the comments, so I'll reply to basically anything.
Paul's if you throw his name into the internet, he will find it.
I have a Google alert.
He has a Google alert for his name. That's great. All right.
Doesn't everyone have that?
No, they don't.
Really? I thought everyone did.
No, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
everybody does follow us. We're just like you. All right. That is going to do it for this episode of the show. First off, I want to thank our sponsor, channelfireball.com. Make sure you check them out for all your Magic needs. As I mentioned earlier, free content, right? You get some of the best content on the internet about Magic for absolutely free, including articles from Paulo every week that we just mentioned as well. So thanks to them, and please check them out. If you want to find us on social media, I'm Marshall_LR, and Luis is LSV. You can find everything related to the podcast at lrcast.com. That includes links to everything that we have, the YouTube channel, the subreddit, everything is on there, including Luis's stream. You should be checking that out. Sometimes I've been streaming, doing my late night stream occasionally as well. You can find links to all that on lrcast.com. Once again, thank you so much, Paulo, for your time. It is much appreciated, and we look forward to having you back on LR sometime soon. That is going to do it for the show this week. Thanks so much. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
So there's two stories I want to tell. The first one is how Paulo got the nickname Pablo Doritos.
Paulo probably has no idea what's going on right now, by the way.
No, I'm sure not, but I'm not going to explain it.
Okay, fair enough.
Just don't hang up, Paulo.
Okay.
You don't actually need to do anything, but because you're here, I'm going to tell these stories, and you literally can't stop me. We were in Nashville, and this is before Uber really existed. So you called for a taxi, and a taxi showed up, and the woman who was working there was like, "Is there a Pablo Doritos here?" Like, and we all obviously knew what she meant.
What the hell?
But she actually like saw your name and for some reason thought it was Pablo Doritos. Like, she literally said that. Like, that this sounds like a name that one of us made up because it was funny, but it actually was a third party who did not know you, who like looked at your name and came to the conclusion that Pablo Doritos was the closest thing that she could assemble. So
and it somehow stuck.
Well, somehow it's just great. The second one involved one of my favorite interactions is when you and Ben Stark interact. This was at Grand Prix Oakland.
Interact. I've seen this, by the way.
This is actually not them arguing. This is just
okay.
Great. Because it's not clear to me. I was going to say it wasn't clear to me who's more fluent in English, but actually it's not close. Paulo's much
No,
more
Paulo's way better at English than Ben.
Ben asked Paulo, or Paulo asked Ben about Florida. This is one of the first times you guys met, actually, in 2009, right when Ben started playing Magic again. And you're like, Ben, how are the beaches in Florida? And Ben thinks for a second. He's like, yeah, the girls are pretty hot. And I'll leave the rest as an exercise to the reader as to what Ben heard and thought.
So bad. Poor Paulo. He's asking an innocent question.